Welcome to today's episode of Charting Tracks. First, here's our annoying legal disclaimer. All views expressed are our own and do not indicate the opinions of any employers or clients for whom we work. The recommendations or advice given in this podcast may or may not be right for you, depending on the circumstances. Please bear this in mind before taking any action. Your hosts for this episode are Ben Hennessy-Garside, who is a voice coach, a multi-instrumentalist, music composer and producer, previously was an A&R scout at Faith and Hope Records, and is currently a lecturer at Leeds Conservatoire, where he teaches voice on the popular music course, and he is a father of two. Chris O'Gorman is a digital marketing strategist. He previously was digital manager at Sony Music and former head of digital at Capitol Records UK. He runs a digital marketing agency and he works on artist development, branding and marketing. My name is Yaqub. I am a record producer, a Grammy Award-winning audio engineer. I'm co-owner of Bison Productions, which is a facility in East London, which provides music production and podcast recording services. And I am director of Garnish Music Production School in London. You're listening to episode number 9 of Charting Tracks, which is part 2 of a conversation on the art of recording. So, once we step into the studio, whether prepared or not prepared, there's certain things we can expect to see in the studio, and these tend to be the things where a producer or an engineer is really going to, be able to take control. So if Chris comes to my studio in our hypothetical situation, although it doesn't have to be hypothetical, Chris, you can come here anytime.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it.
If he comes to the studio and he says, I'd love it if we could put this kind of instrument down, and I don't really expect him to jump in my seat and then start to be plugging stuff in and knowing how my studio's set up and all of this kind of stuff. So kind of coming back a little bit to what Ben said, the role of particularly the engineer in this situation would be to provide, let's just put it this way, technical support. They know the science behind stuff. They know the science behind, how microphones work, what microphone are good on what instruments, and yada, yada, yada. And sometimes, I suppose, quite unfairly, their role can be seen as something which is purely technical / scientific. But obviously there is an art to recording, and this is something that we want to start to open up a little bit. So I'm going to start with Ben. Ben, when it comes to an engineer, and you've done a bit of engineering, of course, as we all have in some way, shape or form, what do you see them as being responsible for?
So, yeah, the engineer is, like you said, placing the microphones, positioning the microphones, making the microphone selection, using the right input gear for that. So if there's a desk in there or some preamps, or there's other decisions to be made about whether you want to put any processing on the sound. Usually these days the processing is put in afterwards, so you've got more flexibility, but some engineers like to, say, compress or something on the way in. There's also decisions to be made about the format. I mean, most recording these days is done digitally, but even then there's a question of, okay, well, what file sizes and all that kind of thing. Usually you want the largest bit rate and the largest sample rate that you can get away with, because you're going to have the highest fidelity. But not always. Sometimes you might want to record in with a purposefully crunchy, messed up sound.
Yeah, like lo-fi.
Like a lo-fi kind of thing, and go for a low sample rate and a low bit rate, or it's highly unlikely that will happen, but it's up to the engineer, in discussion with the producer or the artist if they're self-producing.
Definitely.
To make the equipment work for whatever's the aesthetic requirements of the recording are. So there's all that, and then there's there's just plugging in all the leads, right? Because if you've got a drum kit and you're multi-micing it and you've got 12 mics on the kit and you're recording a bass at the same time, and the bass players lugged their massive bass rig, so even though you're probably going to end up just using a DI box anyway, the bass players still they want to have their bass rig mic'd up. So then you've got to set that up, and so maybe you've got then a DI feed from the bass and then a mic off the bass amp. And then same for guitars, you can multi-mic guitar cabs, right? You could be dealing with any number of inputs, and somebody has to plug all those different mics in, put them in all the relevant slots, into the system, whether that's using an audio interface or going into a desk, and then make sure that all of that stuff lines up and works if you're using digital audio software. And that then also needs to all be labeled correctly. So your kick drum needs to be your kick drum, so you know that if you raise or lower the fader, that you're making the kick drum louder or quieter, not some other instrument. If you've multi-mic'd the kick drum, well, which one, So all of that kind of all of that stuff I see as the engineer's job as well. Sorting out the monitoring, like if maybe you've made this recording and you've got 100 different tracks of audio being recorded and you're doing the final take for the vocal, well, which of those 100 tracks of audio does the vocalist want to hear and at what level? Yeah, so there's managing all that too. I would expect them to know their space. Right? I mean, it depends, it depends if you're location recording or whatever. Perhaps you can spend a bit of time in the session figuring that stuff out. But even then, I'd like them to have done a bit of a recce on the space in advance, if possible. So, where are the spots in the room that you get like a little bit of maybe a little bit of a bass boost or a high end boost, or or if you're working in a space that you've tuned so that there isn't very much of that stuff going on, then you've been involved in the setting up of that space, and so you know all of that, because as you're probably deeply aware, Amir, like whereabouts in a room something's recorded makes a massive difference in terms of the timbre of that sound. It's not as simple as just having an instrument and putting a mic in front of it and playing it. It's like, where's the instrument placed, right? Is the musician comfortable? Where's the microphone placed? Yeah. What are the surfaces in the room? Are they hard, bright surfaces, so you're getting loads of reflection? Are they soft, squishy surfaces, so you're not getting much, but then things might start getting a little muddy if there's too much of that? So there's all of this audio stuff. That's the engineer's realm.
You've pretty much summed it up there. Just to pick up on something that you were saying, in my time as an assistant engineer, one of my jobs was to know the space that I was in.
Right.
And actually, when I would be at the studios, I could be working in any one of 4 rooms. So the studios, Metropolis Studios, had 4 potential rooms that I could be in. All of those rooms had a different console in them, as in a mixing console, mixing desk. Different, but in most cases fairly similar rack gear. So outboard EQs, compressors, delays, reverbs, yada, yada, yada. And they were all different spaces. So my job was, even if there wasn't an engineer there, I would be responsible for knowing, that guy plugged into that guy, and like channel number 7 on the desk is a little bit noisy, so we don't want to use that, or I can't plug into this stage box because, it's dead and, I'm waiting for a tech to sort that out, or let's move you to this corner of the room because we can get a good low mid build up on the guitar sound, whatever it is, right? That was really my role. My job was to know the space and to know the technicalities of moving signals around.
Yeah, and you also pointed out knowing the gear as well. Like that channel's a bit noisy. Like
for some reason it's got static on it, or
it's always the way. Yeah,
and that's the thing when you're paying like from management or label, whatever, when you're paying a fair bit of money per day, and also when you've got a limited artist time, and you're like, we've got a day and we need to get everything done because we're flying out to do a show, like that, saving that precious time. When somebody knows instinctively that channel, blah, 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 and the whole process runs more smoothly, is invaluable. It's
Definitely. And, that took education. And obviously, I picked up my education along with you guys in Leeds. But also, it took education in that space. It took education on those particular consoles, with those particular, the way that the rooms were wired and all of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that was essentially my role. And as an engineer, when I moved into being an engineer, my role was to know the space, but also to be able to communicate appropriately with the producer and the artists in order to get the sound that was required. So it'd be my choice as to what microphone I set up, because I then I'm able to go, actually, I can set up this microphone. I didn't physically set it up. A system would set it up for me because I'd move up the ranks, luckily. But so we know what the role of an engineer is. And let's talk a little bit about the role of a producer. So, Chris, coming back to our little narrative we've got going on, our story that we've got happening, you come to me as a producer. What do you expect from me? What do you expect from a producer?
So I would think that they would craft the overall sound of the record, that they would kind of have in mind. I mean, I suppose like the artist coming would have certain ideas already, would have like maybe some references and be like, I sort of want it to be like this, but then the producer will make that tangible, will translate that vision that the artist has into the actual product. So then we'll almost dress the song, I suppose. We'll have like the bare bones song, and then we'll just start putting the meat on it, and then dress it and build it, and the instrumentation, and so all of so the arrangement, and what instruments they should have on it, what those instruments should play on it. That's what I would think that they would bring to the whole process, to then take that bare bones of a song and then make it a recording, make it an actual production.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So in the role of the producer, one thing that you mentioned, and I am going to pick up on this properly in a second, when you said to dress the song, I'm going to pick up on that in a second. There's a quote that has stuck with me forever, and I always use it when I'm talking about production, particularly. Ben, anything to add to that about the role of a producer?
So yeah, I like that, dressing the song, right? Because quite often when you've got like a band, right, and you've already done quite a lot of the arrangement work already, and you show up, there's something about the recorded medium that often requires something more, right? Whether that's some additional instruments, or some effects or processes, or reimaginings to kind of create the recording. That extra stuff, that feels to me like the producer's job. Now, sometimes the producer might hear the song and be like, "It's pretty much there. We just need to make we just need to capture." But them knowing that the song's pretty much there, at least pre-mix, there might be a bunch of mixing decisions that will add that sparkle, right? So
doesn't that require an immense amount of skill and experience to know that, though? Because I would think like, oh God, I'm the producer, I have to whack all these things on it. But actually, like you said, I think you used I can't remember, Ben or Amir, one of you said used I've forgotten his name, that produced most of Adele's stuff.
Paul Epworth.
Yes, Paul Epworth, yeah. that knew, ooh, that is pretty much there. We just need some. Now, isn't that because I would think, oh God, what am I going to do if this? I need to
throw things on it.
throw
We need
things
a
at
string
it.
section.
Yeah. We're going to have strings.
Right.
We're going to bow. We're going to brass.
Yeah.
Like
Let's put some
how do you-
synths on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So knowing that, ooh, it's pretty much there. We just need a little bit of. How do you know that? How do you? Is that just experience, like from both of your perspectives? What would you know?
I think discernment. So being able, and it's about a lot of the stuff we've talked about in previous. Like, what's the artistic persona? What's the vision for the artist? Is there any style? Stylistic implications. Are there any? But it's more than that. It's do you know the artistic persona? Do you know what the label's going for? Do you know what the artist themselves wants from the project? When the artist turns up, do they have all of that? So, like, you take Adele, right? And we've already talked about there's something of the ordinary person about her. Or at least certainly there was. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if the music changes at all. Now there's been this stuff around her losing weight, but there's something of the ordinary person about that, and so that feels like an adequate, like a decent aesthetic judgment, knowing that on behalf of the producer there in that moment. It's like, yeah, it's she's an ordinary person. She stood by a piano. She's just singing her heart out, like that sense of stripped backness, quote unquote, it kind of feels aesthetically right for Adele. Right. Like it, it makes sense. So I understand why that might be the case. So you've got an artist that's more like, I don't know, like a Beyonce or something, right? It's all pizzazz. Well, there's a lot more pizzazz. Well, then there's other decisions to be made. But then she's made some great records with not much on as well. Actually, there's some gorgeous Beyonce records where there's not much going on, and that but in itself, there's a aesthetic judgment being made, and so that judgment, that discernment, being able to know what the vision is and make sure that the record is carrying that vision, that's what the key is.
And that's where the art starts, really, isn't it? It's when you make an artistic decision to either go all the way or strip it right back or go somewhere in between. For me, the word that sticks out there is vision. Having a strong vision and being able to deliver the vision of the people that you're ultimately serving. So I see when I think of being a producer, I think of serving my clients, as it were.
Yeah.
But in an artistic way rather than in any other way. But, I'm delivering a product, but, serving whatever their vision is. If it's the artist who says, I want to make a record which sits alongside, I don't know, a record from the 70s, then I'm going to deliver that vision. It's also about something that we talked about, confidence. We've talked about confidence in the past, and I think it's important to be confident in your, so one thing that really screams out insecurity is trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink at the production. So when you start to strip stuff back and you start to put stuff there in your productions because they are supposed to be there and because they're serving a purpose, that's when you start to show that you have confidence as a producer. Maybe also alongside confidence, you could think of like having a bit of a daring nature. So if people are really overproducing records in this era of time and you have a record which is completely stripped back, you're being a little bit more daring. You're going against the grain. So as a producer, producers can tend to go, let's dare to do something different. Let's really stick out from the crowd. If everyone's doing something really glossy and hi-fi, or lo-fi, or doing some opposite stuff to that. Going back to what you said though, Chris, and this really sums it up for me. When you talked about dressing a song, so John Mayer, and funnily enough, before we started this podcast, Ben sang a line from one of his songs. So it was written in the stars that he would come up. John Mayer is a fantastic musician and artist, of course. I remember on his Instagram once he said, "A song is like the body and production is like the clothes." So the song being the body is going to be the song no matter how you do it. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about when we talked about the Dolly Parton test and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the clothes, Chris mentioned someone like Darkchild and Timbaland. You gave them the same song, they're going to produce it two different ways. Give that same song to Paul Epworth, he's going to produce it a different way. They're putting different clothes on. The song is still the same.
Yeah.
And I think the producer and the clothes that they choose to put on, that's what it's all about. They can choose to, obviously alter to some degree the form of the song. So they might go that double chorus at the end, screw it, let's just go to a bridge again. They will have a say over that, but the essence of the song will always remain the same. So when we talk about composition, we talk about all of the things that we have talked about, our lyrics, our tam tipfil, that sort of forms part of the song and the production. The clothes and the producer is there to clothe that thing. Everyone has a different aesthetic. And that's what we can kind of expect, right?
That's the thing, isn't it? Aesthetic is interesting because, and like the thing you were saying about confidence as well, and you mentioned Darkchild and Timbaland, I think it was. Because I know that we've had, for developing artists, for instance, we'll get some hot new producer. And we'll, like, say we've got an artist that we're sort of wanting to reposition or wanting to do something a bit different. And we'll get this hot new producer that's got this sound that's working. And they'll get this artist and be like, oh, this is a big artist. And then they go, oh, I need to check out what this artist has done. And they end up then producing something like what the artist has done before. And it's like, no. The reason we're coming to you is because we want your sound.
Yep.
We don't want, like, we've come to you for the Darkchild sound. We've come to you, hot new producer, for your sound, not to do what the artist has already done. And I think you're right. What you're saying is like the confidence, and it takes confidence to know that, hey, they're coming to me for what I do, so I'm going to give them what I do.
Yep.
They can take it or leave it, but it's going to be what I do.
And this is something that I've learned quite recently, and in working with different people at different levels, there's always an expectation that you're going to give that person if they had a song which was called, Feedback, for instance, that was just on my screen. So, Feedback. If they've got a song called Feedback, you're going to give them the new version of Feedback, and it's like, no, they didn't come to you for that. They came to you for a new song, a new sound, maybe, and whatever it is. And there is a lot of confidence that needs to go into that. If previously they've been working with someone that you really admire, for instance, it might be like, oh, this person's coming to me, but they've been working with that person, and they're 10 times better than me, and all this kind of stuff. Having the confidence to do that. And this kind of goes back to talking about engineers, talking about studios. Certain people go to certain studios and certain engineers for the very same reason that they go to a certain producer. So, for instance, for me, I've always been like, I would love to record in Westlake Studios in LA. And people say, why? And I say, because, they only made Thriller there, And that's my draw and my attraction. Because I'll go and I'll get the sound of Michael Jackson. Of course, I won't get the sound of Michael Jackson because I'm not recording him, right? But but I'll soak up the energy and the vibe of where that was recorded, and maybe that will bring something out of me. Going back again to performance and stuff like that. Engineers, particularly mixing engineers. People that we haven't really spoken about that much because they're not in this part of the process so much, but people go to certain mixing engineers because of the simple fact that they love the way they mix the vocals or mix the drums, or there's one of my favorite engineers called Manny Marroquin, the way he processes his delays, they always sound amazing. And they'll go to them for that specific reason. And picking up on that word aesthetic is what it comes back to, because technically, the best 5 mix engineers in the world, they know all of the exact same things. They just choose to focus and process certain things in certain ways.
And have their own styles.
They have their own styles, exactly. So this is one of the things that I think is quite an important thing to talk about as well. Style. Many people think that when it comes to technical roles like engineering or even production, which is classed as more creative, but it's still depending on how we define a producer, is still a technical role. Style. There's a lot to say about style. Perhaps if we haven't really concentrated on this before today's podcast, then we should take a little beat to talk about style. Stylistically, you can choose to record something in any given way, and it's gonna send a message, right? So let's say we take what Ben was saying earlier, and Ben was talking about lo-fi recordings being done lo-fi on purpose. What is the message behind that, Ben, to you?
Well, there's a hearkening back. There's something retro about it. There's something of the 80s. That might be something that you're saying. The other thing that you might be saying is this message is opaque somehow. Right? It's not coming through with clarity. And so that, what does that mean? Well, what does it mean, right? When something isn't being said clearly, there's a ruggedness to it. There's a mysteriousness to it. There's the thing with like shininess. Like, I mean, if we shift. If we try a metaphor out, right? You have a table, okay, it's made of wood. Like, do you buff and shine up the table, or do you leave it rugged looking and kind of like, closer to how the wood was originally when it was first cut, right? In using like lo-fi sounds, there's a grittiness that you're reaching back for. You'll get a similar but slightly different effect from kind of trying to mimic like the sound of it being played back, say, on a vinyl record, or the sometimes people will put, like, obviously recordings used to be made on reel-to-reel tape, and you'd get kind of like a slight shift in the pitching.
Yeah, of course,
as the tape. So
that's right.
You might choose to reach for something like that for something similar as well. So yeah, there's some potential artistic outcomes as a result of choosing to go lo-fi.
Yeah, and I see, this is the thing, and it comes back to style. So Chris, I'm going to ask you now. Stylistically, if we were to make something glossy and shiny, what would we be saying? What's the message? As a listener, or as the artist, or as the listener, what's the messages there? What do you think?
I suppose it's like, it sort of comes back to what we discussed in previous episodes about like artist archetypes and stuff like that. So I feel like if you're going to make something super glossy and it's sort of like, I don't know, maybe your archetype is the ruler or something like that, where you're trying, it's like about status, and it's about, maybe I'm getting too deep into the symbolism
not at all.
But I feel like that was probably what it would be. Whereas if I was like, if my artist sort of archetype is like the explorer or something, it might be, I just want this to be, the guitar is the main sort of, guitar and vocals the main thing, and it's quite, it feels like you could travel with it, and it feels like, it's not grounded, it's not rooted. It's it might be instruments that's like there's a guitar and then there's like, I don't know, another guitar and maybe a mandolin or something on it. I don't know, like like that's kind of what that would be like the instrument, maybe manifestation of that. Or if it was like a lot of sort of program beats and sort of that type of production might be more, well, this is it's more of a club type track, or it's going to be something that's more, this is to be enjoyed by people. It's not there to be sat and listened to and like thought of it. It's there to be danced to and
Yeah.
So I suppose if I because it might be that I'm coming and bringing like, oh, this is kind of my sort of introspective little song that I've written, and it's kind of and then you're like, right, we're gonna put loads of drums on it. It'd be like, oh, but then actually having said that, maybe that could be that something really interesting could come out of that.
Yep, true.
Sometimes I suppose it's like the rules, and then you break the rules, but you have to know the rules first, and there's always the exception to the rules. So sometimes you do something, but you're doing it knowingly, aren't you? You're doing it knowing that you're trying to achieve something different, and by doing that, something that you wouldn't normally do. You wouldn't put like a really introspective, kind of reflective acoustic song and whack loads of production on it. But actually, you might, if you were trying to do something new and something completely sort of different, and you're trying to break the rules intentionally, then maybe you would.
Yeah, definitely, and I mean, all of this stuff really speaks to the art of recording. Kind of bringing it back to what we were talking about artistically, we can make these decisions which send these messages to people, right? So, considering everything that you guys have said specifically, in just that passage there, it comes back to, I can choose to use a really bright microphone for a vocalist, but if really and truly they're trying to get a record which sounds quite dark and moody, why the hell am I going to do that? I can choose to EQ something to be dark and moody, but if they're trying to do something which is quite clearly bright and uplifting, I'm not going to do that, right? So that's the kind of, there has to be the cohesion in all of the elements. And this is outside of also just the music. We're thinking about cohesiveness with the archetypes, cohesiveness with the social media strategy. Let's, for instance, Chris says there's this really good VHS filter that we've got. And considering that you're making music which sounds like it's from the 80s, maybe we can use that for all of your social media posts. And you could start to see
then there's a consistency and a brand identity,
exactly, and that goes back into authenticity and the things that we spoke about to do with that. And when you think about style, and we can think about style in so many different ways, how the artist is going to be branded in terms of imaging, etc., etc. The style of your record is going to be something that you're going to want to consider, down to the very minute details, because it's going to end up forming so much of who you are as an artist, and those people around you, like your producers and engineers and etc., etc. They're going to be important people in developing that style with you. It's kind of like if you go for a photo shoot, you will probably have a photographer who has a style, and a stylist who has a style, and it's of course you can self-shoot, and lots of people do that to save money and because they want to be creative and artistic themselves. However, you're not going to get the same results, and necessarily you're going to get maybe better results, maybe worse results, but you're going to get different results, right? So, and what you were saying, particularly at the end there, Chris, reminded me of a documentary I saw with Nile Rodgers, where he was talking about working with David Bowie, and David Bowie came to him and he started playing a song to him, and he just started playing this very average sounding song. And obviously Nile Rodgers is sitting there going, cool, 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 cool. 10 minutes later, he was like, well, what if we did this? And he started playing what we now know as Let's Dance.
Yeah.
The version that we now know. It's just kind of like, obviously Bowie being one of the most amazing artists of our time and of all time, actually. Sitting there playing it to Nile Rodgers, and Nile Rodgers goes, I think this is, in his own mind, I'm sure he never really said this out loud. I think this is quite distinctly average. So how can I bring a style to this? And then obviously, bang, you've got one of the biggest records of the 80s, right? So when I talk about style, I suppose that kind of sums that up for me. Anything to add to that, guys? So I just want to point out that contradictions exist in our lived experience, right? This thing about things always needing to be smoothly mixed. Well, there's something inauthentic about that too, right? Sometimes all the different elements in a project, from the recording to the composition to the branding to the fashion, all of it just all needs to point in the same direction. Fine. But often it doesn't. Often these contradictions, they're expressions of things, right? And actually, I think Let's Dance as a record is an example of that. I know what you mean.
Like
because
obviously you've got this kind of there's like a funk backing going on.
Yep.
And then you've got Bowie doing his English thing. Yep. And it's there's a kind of, they're sort of in some ways pointing in different directions. Yep. But it's just great. You know.
I know what you mean.
And also Let's Dance, right? It's pointing to a truth, right? Which is, you might be English or you might be from, New York in the 70s, whatever, right? But we all like to dance, and there's this kind of sultry thing in the vocal. Let's dance. There's a kind of there's a sexual charge to that too, which which comes from dance, and that's a very human thing.
Yeah.
So there's this part that's the same, and then there's also these other oppositional forces at work, and so sometimes creatively it makes sense to point in different directions with different parts of your offer. And this thing about your offer being everything is an artistic choice, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, and quite often musicians, because we're musicians, get focused on the music, and we think that that's all there is to what we're doing. But the recording process, there are a bunch of codes, conventions. There's a whole lineage of aesthetic and artistic practices that's evolved over time. It's a piece that needs to be taken seriously as an art form, not just as these are the people in suits who need to set up the microphones because they understand science and they will just reproduce everything that we perform. They will reproduce that exactly as we perform it in the space in that moment, right?
And there's a place for that as well, isn't there?
Yes, of course. And to say that, I'm not saying that that can't happen, right? And there are some engineers that will do that for you, right? Yeah. They're just there to capture whatever it is in the space.
I don't know if they're miking up the Albert Hall for the proms. They're just there to.
Right.
We want as accurate as is physically possible to what it sounds like in that room. That's what they're after, right?
Yes, absolutely. The truth is, though, is that in saying that, that also can't exist, right? Mics have frequency responses.
Yeah. It's always
even the flattest frequency response, mic, there's going to be slight differences at different distances. There's going to be slight differences depending on the
room.
But that's a good point, isn't it? Because in the room, if I'm up in the gallery,
I'm going to hear something slightly different to somebody sitting down in the stalls, who's going to hear something different to somebody in the, I don't know, that's hearing it from the arena floor. So
Yeah.
there's no true.
True. And the point with all of that is it's not just like a flat process. Yeah. There's a lot of depth to the recording process. Even when you're trying to reproduce like a flat response, like you can't just do that.
Yeah.
There's a whole heap of other processes to run through. So just reiterating that thing that the recording process is as much a potential creative space as any other aspect of your practice.
Recording engineers and that are just as creative with mic placements and all of that as somebody, as a composer or as a producer.
So this is exactly what I was going to say. We talked about Westlake Studios, we talked about Thriller, we talked about Michael Jackson recording vocals and the engineer on that, Bruce Swedien. I've read like 2 of his books and listened to about 500 interviews. He said that when he recorded Michael Jackson, to record his backing vocals, he asked him to step backwards from the microphone to record one harmony. And then when he'd recorded that harmony, he'd ask him to step back again and then step back again. And he could kind of get the imaging and the feeling of a choir instead of having just recorded all his vocals in the same position on the microphone. He created the depth and the distance that way. He also, I believe, for Billie Jean, he created a tunnel for the kick drum. So he had like the kick drum on one end and a microphone on the other, and which gave like a special sound. And also there's that bit in Billie Jean, which is don't think twice. Michael Jackson sang the second one actually shouting into a tube.
I'd assumed it was an effect put on afterwards.
I mean, it sounds like a delay, right?
Yeah, but that was tracked.
Yeah,
with it.
With Michael Jackson shouting into a tube, and even if you think of a modern example, and this was really funny because this is a very third-hand story. But someone was talking to me once, and they were like, a friend of theirs got back to dinner with them or whatever, and they went, "You'll never guess what just happened." And my friend was like, "Yeah, what happened?" He was like, "I was just in a studio, and Pharrell was working on a song where he was using a spray can, and he was just going shh, shh, and it turned out that song was "Drop It Like It's Hot" by Snoop Dogg, and if you listen to the record, you can hear it. Shh. He's using a spray can of compressed air to do that. So, I mean, there's so much creativity, which obviously makes for great stories on podcasts. But also,
actually, and it provides great marketing as well. I have to say, because stuff like that is gold. When I hear something like that, I'm like, excellent. That's going to be in the interview. That gives us so much. It gives you loads of stuff to start talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And, it used to be like, obviously, as you guys know, I'm a big fan of Pharrell and the Neptunes and, all of that. How do they get those sounds? And apparently the engineer used to take these specific buckets around with them. Every session they had that, he'd hit a pattern with a beater and that would be their drum sound for their kick drum.
Yeah.
So they would have that sound and layer it with another sound and all that kind of stuff. And this is what kind of creates that separation and makes it a bit more artistic, a bit more creative, but also gives us some wonderful things to talk about on a podcast, which is fantastic. So the final point that I want to talk about today is recording yourself, which we've kind of spoken about a little bit, but also producing yourself. What are some of the things that you can expect to encounter, maybe some of the good things, some of the bad things, some of the frustrations, so on and so forth. I'm going to start with Chris here. So, Chris, if I said to you, sorry, mate, I love that our story has lasted this long, right?
Yeah.
But if you were to come to me with your sketches from your home studio and I said to you, sorry, Chris, you're going to have to produce this record yourself.
Right.
Is that daunting? And
Yes, first of all, of
and
course, that's what.
and B, what do you think you have to do in order to get there?
God. First of all, I'd have a freak out and be like, okay, how can I do this? And then I think once I got over that, it would be going back to my reference sort of material, like what I sort of had in mind when I was like writing it, you know, and to try and have sort of some 2 or 3 sort of reference points of like, that's what I'm sort of trying to go for.
Yeah.
And I would note that I think just what there would become, I think, what my own abilities are would be the focal point there, because I can't program beats and I can't do any of that stuff. But what I can do is play guitar and I can play piano and I can play the flute. So I would go back to what's in my wheelhouse, what's in my toolkit. And those are the things that I have in my toolkit. So I'd be like, okay, well, those are probably going to end up being elements of this in some way. And that maybe that's going to be sort of the, how I'd craft it. And it's going to be the consistent theme, and it's going to be acoustic. It's going to have maybe some piano, so maybe some flute on it. And that's really going to be, that's going to be it. That's going to be that. So it would influence my instrument choices. It would influence the sort of, I think it would influence the nature of the recording. It would influence what overdubbing you're doing, and I think it would. I think that what I would do is go back to, what I have in my own personal armory is, and base it around that.
Good, and I like your approach. Ben, obviously you've got a much more experience in production, I guess, and everything. What would be your advice? What can you expect when you're self-producing, good or bad?
So, first thing I'd go back to the songs. I'd take a look at the songs. I'd get into the story of the song. I'll see if I've got I've got that. Like if there's an emotional journey that tracks through the lyric. I feel like I can say this because most of my own work is quite like the lyrics are an important part, like quite an important part of what I do. So
yeah,
it's important that for me as an artist that they're present and considered. So I would go back there. Once I'd done that, then it's about being creative, and so it's we've already talked about setting up the space in a creative way. I really like what you were saying then, Chris, about, well, what have you got? What do I have access to? And you know, it's if you give those examples with the Neptunes and with Pharrell, right? Well, they had buckets.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the other thing too, is like outside of the box, think outside of the box, you know, like,
of course,
if you don't have a drum kit, right. What do you have? You don't have an actual kick drum. Well, what do you have? Well,
pots and pans.
Yeah. Pots, pans. You can use software to detune, you know, so if you've got something that sounds a bit like a kick drum, but perhaps a little too toppy, there's not enough bottom ending. Well, you could pitch shift it down, you could stack it, you could take white noise, and there's stuff you can do in the box with EQ to kind of layer things up. So all the while with this process, though, it's coming for me personally. It will be coming back to the material, like what's being spoken through this particular slide. Why do I need that kick drum there in that place if I'm going to have one? And if I do have it, what's does the character need to be of that kick drum, right? But you can't make those decisions until you really understand the song. Now, that's just my personal process. There are some people that just play. And then the song and the story and all of that kind of emerges from the bottom up rather than the top down.
Yeah.
So, that's how I would do it. And I would, every time you feel like you're coming up against a block, it's like, well, what's the route around? That would be the opening question. What's the route around? Okay. I can't make a snare drum sound that sounds like the one on the Black Album by Metallica, right? But like, what can I do? You know,
Instead,
yeah. What can I do instead? And what's going to say the same thing as that snare drum sound, right?
Because that sound has it has a message. It's like this sounds aggressive. It sounds well. I mean, I've completely forgotten what that record sounds like, but this sounds aggressive and it sounds loud, and you know, the way that it's being hit makes me want to move my head forward and bash my head and whip my hair back and forth. And you can do that with another sound.
There's I mean, for me, there's a clarity to that recording. Yeah, what's being said with that clarity? Well, that word, how else can I create a sense of clarity and combined with aggression?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in asking the question, well, that opens up a heap of possible answers.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, one thing that you said, and of course that you've kind of reiterated to some degree, Ben, you might not own everything that you want to own when you start to produce, but that's okay. When I started, I had a USB microphone and Cubase, and that didn't stop me. I didn't release anything, of course, but that didn't stop me from starting to learn and acquire the skills that I need in order to, you know, get better. And
You've got to start somewhere, yeah.
Everyone's got to start somewhere. You've got to start somewhere. My first instrument wasn't a Baldwin piano or a Steinway. It was a Casio keyboard.
Yeah.
And you know, even that keyboard had sounds on it, which in a way, I wish I kept that keyboard, because today I'd use those sounds. You know,
Did it have the Bossa Nova demo button?
definitely.
That's why I have this. That's why I have this thing here, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why this thing here. This like my that's probably about 25, 30 years old.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's got to be.
My dad bought it for me as I used to go and visit him, and he bought it for me as a thing that I could play on. And it's like, but just hearing those, it's like, this is just great.
Yeah,
like it's so not like a piano.
Yeah,
that it's not a piano. It's just sort of piano-ish.
It's not even trying to be at this. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't want a piano sound. Yeah. You want something that's piano-ish.
Yeah.
So piano-ish, exactly. That's so right. Yeah.
You appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah.
And that's what you've got to start to do wherever you are. You might have. Chris mentioned, you know, GarageBand, which is essentially a free DAW with the ability to record and some stock sounds built in there, and it comes free with your laptop if you buy from a big company who I'm not going to name, just in case you know. And you start there, and you just start with that. You start with where you are, and you use what you have. One of my pieces of advice, I don't know why I've got two pencils here, but one of my pieces of advice.
Keep two pencils.
Yeah.
Always have two pencils in your hand.
One of my pieces of advice to many people that I work with who are maybe I'm mentoring or I'm teaching, buy one piece of gear and learn it inside out. So if you remember, particularly guys, when we were at university, I didn't own 25 microphones. I owned one.
Yeah.
And today I'm recording percussion and I'll put this on there. And today I'm recording vocals, I'll put this on there. And so on and so forth. And you learn how that particular thing worked, and you learn to take it and transfer the skills that you've acquired. Oh, well, actually, if I place this microphone closer, then there's a build-up in the low-mid frequencies, and I want a little bit more low-mid frequencies in my guitar, which I'm recording tomorrow, so I'll push my microphone closer. You take that, you start applying it, and you're not overcomplicating anything, so you're applying limitations.
I think there's a real beauty in that, isn't there?
There really is, and there was that one microphone that they used to use all over the Stevie Wonder recordings. It's known as the Stevie Wonder microphone, the Electro Voice RE20, which basically they used to use in kick drums, on the amp of the Rhodes, on his vocals.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, all of that stuff, because it helped to tie the sound together.
Right.
What was your mic, Amir? I'm intrigued. What were you on?
I think it was just one by Studio Electronics.
An SE Electronics one, yeah.
Yeah, it was just like an entry level condenser microphone, kind of 200 quid.
Yeah, because it wasn't. They just started coming in from China around that time, hadn't they? And SE Electronics were one of the first ones.
Yeah.
That was great when you could buy them.
Yeah. And you know, obviously now the microphone market is, if you're thinking of microphones to record vocals or buckets or whatever, it's much better. The microphones that I use now that don't cost as much, they sound really good. There's a microphone I have, which I paid probably around £250 for. It sounds phenomenal on everything. And it's just like, wow. If I had this when I was at university, I would have absolutely ripped it. But then again,
that's what's really funny, because I remember a story somebody told, a producer told, I can't remember who it was. They were talking about the Alanis Morissette album, that Jagged Little Pill. And they were talking about the recording process of it. And they said that she recorded all of her vocals for that album on an SM57.
Yeah, £70 microphone, basically.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was like, hang on. That album sold 33 million copies. And you're telling me that vocal was done with like a standard, like the most standard mic? I was just like, that's excellent. And they tried everything else on her voice, but that was the thing that worked. That was the crazy part. They tried everything else. And they were like, yeah, this sounds best. It just sounds best.
And this is what happens, and this is what you'll find. Actually, you might have bought a microphone for £70, which is like, okay, retail maybe the SM57 is like 80 and a bit pounds. But you might have bought a microphone which doesn't cost a lot of money, but it suits your voice so perfectly. And actually, someone can bring you a microphone that costs £12,000 and you would go, it doesn't do the same thing. I'm going to record all my vocals on this in my room with a duvet behind me, and you can completely just screw your £3,000 a day studio because I don't want it.
Yeah. Like producing great work with kind of approaches like that is more possible now
than ever.
Yeah, and I think you know, the thing is, yes, we've discussed how we have more tools and things are more accessible and everything, but we have much more knowledge as well. So we're sitting here talking about certain stories and certain approaches and so on, and there's like 5 or 6 other podcasts that might tell you something similar or different. And then there's the whole of the internet, which is, you know, I mean, YouTube alone is just, you know. So because of those things specifically, when we think about self-producing, it's good to keep in mind the things that we've said today, but also just know that if you come up against an obstacle, like Ben was saying, there's going to be a way around it. And it might not involve money. It might involve in you watching a YouTube video for 20 minutes about why your microphone sounds so bad, even though you thought it sounded good before. And you find out, I've got it the wrong way around. Of course.
It's amazing how easy that is to do.
Just check your mic. So, obviously, today's episode has been all about the art of recording, and we've discussed, you know, to some degree, the technicality of it, the people who would be involved in the process, all of that kind of stuff. Really, the takeaway for me is to not be scared to do stuff for yourself, obviously, to try and own a recording setup of your own if you can, and obviously try and have a very strong vision about what you want your record to sound like. You don't need to fit into any sort of mold. Try and create a style, whether that's using certain pieces of gear, teaming up with certain people, or whatever it is. Any parting words from you, Chris?
I think I just echo what you just said. Yeah, it's experiment and try and find ways of using what you've got, at least to a certain extent. But I think you're right, though. You have to have a core, like, if you like, just to start off, what are the core? I guess, well, what would be the core elements that you'd need to have? Because I would think that you'd need to have. There's a little core elements that you need to have, and then experiment with those. And what would that be? Just a laptop, an interface, and a mic? Is that pretty much your starting?
Yeah, it's that simple with some headphones on top, and you're done.
Yeah.
You can make great records, I promise you.
and I guess like maybe the one thing, because I think the story, I really enjoy the stories behind it, probably because it goes back to my marketing thing. I hearing about the stories behind something and how they came, like with the Michael Jackson thing, with the cone, and how they decided to, I think that is the thing. If you like the sound of something, find out how it was done, because you can probably find it. It's probably all online somewhere. There'll be some interview and some publication where you can find it out.
And here's the funny thing, we've talked about people from the past, Michael Jackson, and we've almost missed out. I can't believe I've missed this out. Where was Billie Eilish's album produced?
Oh, is it?
It was in her brother's bedroom.
And that's the story. It's
that whole album,
bedroom production. Yeah,
that whole album was produced.
Again, huge selling album.
Obviously, she's a massive artist.
Yeah,
that album sounds great, and her brother's a great producer. But obviously, the mix engineer, mastering engineer, did a great job.
Yeah,
but we also have a saying: you can't polish a turd. So it can't have been that bad in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So
there was they were working with some great raw material to begin with, because
it was good enough, wasn't it?
Yeah,
like whatever it was.
I believe it was more than good enough.
Well. I love that.
Yeah. So
that album.
As Chris said, that's some of the marketing was based off the back of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great story there straight away. It's
absolutely
brother and sister team made this record in their bedroom, and already that you've got so much to work with there from a sort of PR and marketing angle.
Yeah, exactly. Ben, any parting words from you?
One thing I would say is train your ears, right? Not just by listening to music, that's great. Use your reference material, of course, but the other thing is just listen to the sounds of stuff, right? So if I'm sat here, I have a table, right? I could just look at it and go, oh, look, it's a table. Great, I can put stuff on. That's what you do with tables. But actually, it's also an instrument, right?
Yeah, of course.
If I change the things that I'm hitting it with, the sound changes, right? Just remember that you live in an auditory environment as well, right? And so, and take things that you wouldn't ordinarily use an instrument and see how they sound. And you'll clock things. Like I've got some... up here, I have some. They're old metal pan tops.
Oh yeah,
and they just resonate in a way that you wouldn't expect from a pan top. Like, would it be too weird? Shall I show you? Or would it be too weird for me to? Would that be weird? Do you want to hear?
I mean, you're gonna have to do it now, aren't you?
While he's doing that, I'll tell you that I once used a humidifier as a conga drum, that's a conga drum.
That's amazing.
Because I couldn't find anything else, and I was like, oh, I had this humidifier.
Okay. That's quite nice.
Okay. So I have there are two here.
You're not joking. They really are.
No, just literally
they really are pot lids,
right? So listen, and you should be able to hear two distinct tones, right? and I'll move one nearer to the mic, and then I'll move the other one nearer to the mic so you can hear them, like the balance change. But
Interesting.
like this one's still going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's a stain on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's mad.
You know, I could record those. I could pitch shift them. I could put them in a sampler. I could do whatever I want with them.
So Ben, when are we expecting your record with metal pan tops?
I'm here for it.
Are you?
I'm ready for it. Let's have it. Again, if you did that, I could put you a nice marketing plan, a PR story around that. I really could.
I love it. No, but you're absolutely right. And you know what, Ben? I think you're right. We've always got to use our ears. That is the key. Developing your ears is number one. The number one thing you want to do, obviously musically, but obviously in terms of all sonics, all of the sonics, just listen to your environment. Let's wrap up today's episode, guys, by saying thank you to everyone for listening. We do appreciate you. We love you very much. If you love us, that is. No, but even if you don't, we
Even
love
if you
you.
don't. Yeah. It doesn't need to be requited.
Nor reciprocated. And obviously, if you don't love us, then you need the love that we're giving to you. I would say if you can, like, subscribe, follow, do all of those kind of things. Show notes we will have, obviously, as we always do, available for you after the show has gone out. And in closing, I just wanted to say thank you to my co-hosts, Ben and Chris. You guys are the best, of course. And we shall see you on the next one.
Next one.
Ciao.
Bye.